The beta mocked her pain, until the Alpha King arrived and marked her in one fierce claim. Towers of black stone rose from the ground like frozen screams, crowned with spires that pierced the low-hanging clouds. Here, power was measured in whispers, in glances, and in the sway of the Alpha and Beta who controlled the territories beyond the castle walls. Lady Seraphine stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, her hands lightly clasped, her gaze fixed on the polished marble floor. The flickering candlelight danced across her face, highlighting the faint shimmer of spectral scars that ran along her arms, a cruel inheritance from a family curse. She could feel them prickling, a whisper of pain and warning whenever cruelty brushed too close. The scars were her secret, her shame, though no one in the court would have guessed it. Tonight, the Northern Pax had come for the annual gathering, a celebration of loyalty, power, and alliances. Lords and ladies moved like pieces on a chessboard, their smiles polite, their eyes calculating. Among them, Lord Kale, the beta of the Northern Pax, prowled the room like a predator sensing weakness. His voice was smooth, but it carried the sharp edge of mockery. Seraphine had learned to tolerate the glances, the whispers, the subtle disdain of the courtiers. But Kale's amusement at her expense felt different. It was not just teasing. It was a deliberate strike meant to wound, to display his superiority before the others. "Ah, Lady Seraphine," Kale said, his words dripping with feigned courtesy. "I see you've endured the family curse with your usual grace. Though I must say, the flicker on your arms, it seems the pain suits you better than your smile." A ripple of forced laughter followed, and Seraphine felt the familiar sting of humiliation. The spectral scars on her arms flared faintly, unseen by the rest of the court but painfully real to her. Her fingers clenched involuntarily. She had faced many challenges in her life, but tonight, in the center of the hall, she felt exposed and fragile. She lifted her chin, refusing to let Kale see the depth of her discomfort. "Your wit is as sharp as ever, Lord Kale," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart thudded in uneasy rhythm. "But I wonder if you wield it as skillfully as you claim." Kale's lips curved into a smile that was both charming and cruel. "Ah, Lady Seraphine, do not mistake my amusement for cruelty. I merely point out what everyone else might notice but dare not speak." He leaned closer, and the faint scent of cold iron clung to him, a reminder of the northern forests he ruled. Seraphine swallowed the sudden rise of panic and the heat that flared in her chest. This was no ordinary courtly teasing. His words cut deeper, meant to draw a reaction, to humiliate her before witnesses. Her pulse quickened and the spectral scars shimmered more brightly, like faint silver flames beneath her skin. She clenched her fists at her sides, willing herself to remain composed. But the room seemed smaller, the shadows heavier, and every laugh of the courtiers a dagger. Then, as Kale prepared another barbed remark, a tremor of tension rippled through the room. The torches flickered violently, though no wind entered the hall. A low rumble echoed, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with a slow, ominous heartbeat. The laughter died abruptly. Eyes darted toward the grand double doors at the end of the hall which had remained closed. The heavy oak panels groaned as though under the weight of some immense force. Then, with a sudden crash that sent candles sputtering, the doors burst open. A figure entered, tall, commanding, and impossibly regal. The Alpha King, Lord Draven, walked into the room, his presence radiating a raw power that silenced all but the most foolish whispers. His dark cloak swept the floor, embroidered with silver symbols of the ancient lineages, symbols that glowed faintly in the flickering light. His eyes, sharp as storm clouds, swept the ballroom until they landed on Seraphine. For a moment, time seemed to halt. Kale, who had just been mocking her, froze mid-sentence, his smile faltering. He had faced many challenges in his life, but nothing had prepared him for the intensity of Draven's gaze. Seraphine felt an unfamiliar heat rise in her chest, a mix of fear and something else she could not name. She had heard of Draven, of course, the legendary Alpha King whose power was said to be unmatched, whose judgment was both feared and respected. Yet standing before him in the echoing silence of the hall, she realized she had never truly imagined him as real. Draven's gaze lingered on her, and in that moment the faint shimmer of her scars seemed to respond. There was recognition there, not pity, but understanding. The room felt smaller, the shadows less oppressive, yet the air itself seemed charged with tension. Kale's voice, once sharp and confident, faltered. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low, but his words sounded hollow even to him. Draven's voice, when he spoke, was calm but carried the weight of mountains and storms. "Kale, your arrogance will not stand here." His eyes did not leave Seraphine. "And you," he said, nodding slightly in her direction, "are not to be mocked or diminished by anyone." A murmur of astonishment spread through the hall. The courtiers shifted uneasily, their previous amusement replaced by awe. The beta who had so cruelly tormented Seraphine now paled under the Alpha King's scrutiny. Seraphine's heart raced, her fear slowly transforming into something more complex, a flicker of hope, of validation she had never expected. Draven's presence alone seemed to cast a protective glow around her, shielding her from Kale's venom. Yet the moment was not without danger. Kale's eyes, dark and calculating, did not leave Seraphine. Even under the Alpha King's gaze, he seemed to plot, his mind a storm of humiliation and revenge. The room held its breath, sensing the tension coiled like a spring ready to snap. Draven took a measured step closer, his boots echoing against the marble floor. "Kale," he said, each syllable deliberate, "mock her again, and you will see why the Alpha King is feared across these lands." The threat hung in the air like a blade suspended above the room. Kale swallowed, his composure cracking, and muttered something that no one else could hear. Then he bowed again, deeper, and retreated toward the shadows, his pride wounded but his plans far from over. Draven turned fully to Seraphine. The room seemed to fade around them, the murmurs of the court replaced by the thrum of her own heartbeat. "You endure much," he said, his voice soft now, yet carrying an undeniable strength. "And yet you stand here." Seraphine could barely meet his eyes, the intensity almost too much to bear. I only try to survive," she whispered. Her voice was fragile, yet something in her tone caught Draven's attention. He stepped closer still, closing the distance between them, and the warmth of his presence was unlike anything she had felt before. "You survive," he said, "but you are not meant to hide in shadows." His gaze flicked to the faint shimmer along her arms. "Your strength is undeniable. Even the curse cannot touch what lies within." A rush of emotion surged through her, fear, longing, and an unspoken relief. She had spent her life masked in silence, her pain a secret weapon for those who sought to control her. And now, the one person who wielded true power recognized her not as weak, but as formidable. But just as a sense of safety began to take hold, the doors at the far end of the hall creaked again, and a shadow moved along the balcony outside. A piece of parchment fluttered down, landing near Seraphine's feet. She bent to pick it up, her fingers trembling, and read the single line written in careful, dark script. "Your suffering is only beginning." The words made her pulse quicken. Kale had not yet vanished from the story. He was watching, plotting, and the threat of his cruelty had not ended. The tension between fear and hope twisted in her chest like a living thing. She glanced at Draven, who had noticed the parchment but said nothing, his eyes still fixed on her with unwavering intensity. The Alpha King's presence was both a shield and a spark. Seraphine felt the stirrings of something dangerous and irresistible, a bond forming, one that promised protection, power, and perhaps a reckoning she had not dared imagine. Yet the shadow of Kale's mockery, now transformed into threat, lingered, reminding her that survival in Valdrin was never simple, and that pain and power often walked hand in hand. The ballroom, once filled with laughter and scorn, now seemed a threshold between her past and a future uncharted. Seraphine straightened her shoulders, her resolve hardening. The curse had marked her, the beta had humiliated her, but the Alpha King had arrived, and with him, a storm of change that could either lift her from darkness or sweep her into it entirely. And as Draven's gaze lingered, as silent and commanding as a mountain in the night, Seraphine realized that her story was no longer hers alone. Fate, power, and desire had intertwined, and the next step she would take could awaken forces she was only beginning to understand. The flicker of her scars dimmed slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of the moment's fragile hope, as the candlelight cast long shadows across the hall. Outside, the wind whispered through the northern forests, carrying promises and threats alike. And somewhere in the darkness, Kale's plotting heart beat with renewed malice. The story of survival, of claim, and of the shadowed power of Valdrin had only just begun. The following morning, the halls of Valdrin Castle were quieter than usual. Sunlight filtered through the tall, arched windows, casting long, golden streaks on the cold stone floors. Lady Seraphine walked the corridors, her thoughts still tangled in the events of the previous night. The memory of Lord Kale's mockery lingered like a shadow at the edge of her mind, yet the presence of the Alpha King, Draven, burned brighter in her heart. She entered the courtyard, where the early mist curled around fountains and statues, giving the place a dreamlike, almost otherworldly quality. Even in the light, the sense of power that Draven carried lingered, as though the air itself remembered him. Seraphine's fingers brushed against the faint shimmer of her scars, reminders of her curse, yet also of the night's strange shift. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of boots echoing on the stone steps. Draven emerged, tall and imposing, his cloak catching the morning light. His eyes found hers immediately, and in them she saw both command and something more intimate, an acknowledgement of her pain and her worth. "Lady Seraphine," he said, his voice calm but heavy with authority, "the curse that plagues you does not define you. Do you understand that?" Seraphine lowered her gaze, uncertainty flickering within her. I have lived with it all my life. It is a part of me whether I like it or not." Draven took a slow step closer. "And yet you endure. That endurance is strength, and strength is rare in this world. It is why I am here." His eyes held hers, and for a heartbeat the rest of the courtyard seemed to vanish. "You speak as though you know me," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "but you have seen only a moment." "I have seen enough," he replied, "enough to know that mocking you would be an unforgivable mistake." Seraphine's pulse quickened. The memory of Kale's laughter from the night before made her stomach twist with unease. Yet Draven's presence offered a strange comfort, a shield against both ridicule and fear. She had never felt such a combination of respect and intensity directed solely at her. Before she could respond, the distant sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the courtyard. Kale, as if drawn by spite and curiosity alike, had returned, his eyes dark and calculating fixed on the pair. Unlike last night, he did not approach with arrogance. Instead, he lingered at the edge of the courtyard, observing, waiting. Draven's gaze flicked toward Kale, sharp and unyielding. "You should leave," he said, "before your presence brings more trouble than it is worth." Kale's lips pressed into a thin line, but he did not move. Instead, he seemed to calculate, searching for weakness in the Alpha King's command. Seraphine felt a shiver of tension. Kale's malice was persistent, and even Draven's protection could not remove it entirely. Draven turned back to her. "You will not face this alone," he said firmly. "Your pain, your curse, your fears, they are yours, but you are not meant to bear them in silence." Seraphine looked into his eyes, and for the first time she felt a flicker of hope mingled with uncertainty. I do not know how to accept help," she admitted softly. "I have always survived on my own." "That is what makes you strong," Draven said, "but even the strongest cannot stand alone forever. You must let someone share the weight." He reached out, and for a moment the distance between them felt impossible to cross. Then, with a decisive gesture, he traced a symbol over her hand, an ancient marking, both protective and binding. It glowed faintly, warm to the touch, and the sensation made her gasp. The mark pulsed like a heartbeat, not with the curse's pain but with a power that seemed to belong to them both. "Do you feel it?" Draven asked, his voice softening. "It is a claim, yes, but not one that diminishes you. It is acknowledgement, recognition, protection." Seraphine's breath caught in her throat. The warmth of the mark spread along her veins, and with it came a strange courage. The scars of her curse dimmed slightly, as if recognizing a new force that could counterbalance their sting. She looked at Draven, words failing her, but her eyes spoke volumes. Kale's shadow loomed at the edge of the courtyard, his anger and disbelief evident. Yet he did not dare approach. Draven's claim, subtle though it was, carried a weight beyond mere threat. It was a bond, a recognition of power, and a warning that Kale could not ignore. "You do not understand," Kale muttered, his voice low but tense. "This is not over." Draven's gaze shifted, icy and unyielding. "It is over for you, Kale. Not because I say so, but because your cruelty cannot stand where true strength resides." Kale's jaw tightened. He retreated slowly into the shadows, his presence lingering like a storm cloud on the horizon. Seraphine exhaled, her chest heavy but steadied by the Alpha King's unwavering presence. You marked me," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "Why?" Draven's expression softened, just enough for her to see a flicker of vulnerability beneath his powerful exterior. "Because you deserve it. Because no one should belittle what you endure or take your strength for granted. That mark is not just protection, it is my acknowledgement of you. Your pain is seen. Your worth is recognized." Seraphine's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and confusion. She had spent her life hiding, surviving in silence, bearing the weight of a curse that few understood. Now, standing before Draven, she felt a strange and dangerous emotion take root: trust, perhaps even longing. "Do you always speak like this to those you protect?" she asked, a hint of curiosity breaking through her fear. Draven's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "I protect those who matter," he said simply, "and you matter more than you realize." The warmth of his words, the intensity of his gaze, the pulsing power of the mark, it all left Seraphine both exhilarated and unsettled. She wanted to retreat, to hide behind the familiar shield of solitude, yet she could not tear her eyes away from him. Before she could gather her thoughts, the distant wind carried a faint, unsettling whisper. A shadow moved in the trees beyond the courtyard, a reminder that Kale's threat was not yet gone. He would return, of that she had no doubt. Draven noticed her unease. "Do not fear him," he said, his tone firm. "He may try, but he will fail. His power is nothing compared to ours should we stand together." Seraphine took a shaky breath, feeling both reassurance and a strange anticipation. Together. The word echoed in her mind, carrying possibilities she had never dared imagine. She had always fought alone, but now she was not alone. Draven extended his hand, and for a moment hesitation gripped her. To accept it was to accept more than protection. It was to accept a bond she did not fully understand. Yet the warmth of the mark on her hand, the recognition in his eyes, gave her courage. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his. A pulse of energy surged between them, subtle but undeniable. It was not just magic, it was a promise, a tether that linked their fates. Seraphine felt a thrill, a shiver that ran down her spine, mingled with the knowledge that her life had just shifted in ways she could not yet predict. The courtyard was silent save for the distant call of birds and the rustle of the mist. Even the sun seemed to hold its breath. Seraphine looked up at Draven, and for the first time she felt the weight of the future pressing against her chest, not as fear but as possibility. "Whatever comes," Draven said quietly, "we face it together. That is the meaning of the mark." She nodded, words unnecessary. The bond between them spoke louder than any declaration could, and yet a part of her mind remained alert, wary of Kale's looming shadow. Survival had taught her caution, and she knew that the beta's malice would not simply vanish. As they walked back toward the castle, side by side, the sense of alliance and something deeper wove between them. Each step was both a promise and a challenge, an invitation into a world of power, passion, and peril she had never dared enter before. But in the forests beyond the castle walls, hidden among the shadows, Kale's eyes glinted with fury. The beta had witnessed the Alpha King's claim, and it had not broken him, yet it had stoked the flames of vengeance. Plans would be made, schemes hatched, and Seraphine's trials were far from over. The bond of mark and claim would be tested, and the Alpha King and Lady Seraphine would have to discover not only their strength, but also the depth of trust and courage that true power demanded. And as the sun climbed higher, casting its golden light across Valdrin, a quiet, almost predatory wind swept through the northern forests, carrying whispers of challenge, warning, and the dark promise that the story of the Cursed Lady and the Alpha King was only beginning. The moon rose over Valdrin like a pale guardian, casting silver light over the castle and the forests beyond. The air was thick with mist, and the scent of pine, a mixture of calm and foreboding that mirrored Lady Seraphine's heart. She walked along the outer balcony, her hand brushing against the cold stone, feeling the faint warmth of Draven's mark pulse through her skin. It was a steady, reassuring beat, a reminder that she no longer faced her burdens alone. Yet, even in this fragile serenity, a shadow lingered. Lord Kale had not been seen since the morning confrontation in the courtyard, but Seraphine knew better than to believe he had vanished. He was cunning and patient, a predator who would strike when least expected. Draven joined her on the balcony, his presence as commanding as the mountains themselves. He stood close enough that the warmth of his cloak brushed against her shoulders, but he left space, respectful, deliberate. His eyes, sharp and stormy, scanned the horizon before settling on her. "You have not slept," he said softly, as if reading the unrest in her mind. "I cannot," Seraphine admitted, her voice a whisper. "Kale, he will not stop, I feel it." Draven nodded, a shadow of concern passing across his strong features. "He is clever, but he underestimates us. Together, we are more than he can imagine. The mark ties you to me, and that bond is stronger than any threat he could muster alone." Seraphine's hand instinctively touched the faint glow of the mark. Its warmth was comforting, yet it reminded her that their connection was no casual bond. It was a claim, fierce and irrevocable. She had accepted it, but understanding its full power would require trials she had yet to face. As if in confirmation of her fears, a sudden cry pierced the night. From the forest below, shadows moved with unnatural speed, and a chilling wind swept through the balcony, carrying the faint echo of malicious laughter. Kale had returned not alone but with a dark force she could not yet identify. Draven's stance shifted instantly. Every inch of his being radiated readiness, a predator alert to challenge. "Stay close," he commanded, his voice low, steady, and urgent. "Do not be afraid. You are stronger than you believe, and tonight that strength will guide you." Seraphine drew in a deep breath, her pulse quickening. She had feared confrontation before, but with Draven beside her, fear transformed into a strange exhilaration. They were no longer two separate figures caught in the dance of power and cruelty. They were a united force, bound by trust, recognition, and the strange, unspoken promise of more. The shadows descended into the courtyard, twisting and coiling as if alive. Kale stepped forward, his eyes glinting with malice. "So the little lady has a protector now," he sneered. "How touching, but we shall see how long it lasts." Draven moved before she could respond, his voice like steel. "You overestimate yourself, Kale. This ends tonight." Kale's lips curled into a cruel smile, and from the darkness emerged strange shapes, creatures born of ancient curses and forbidden rites. They were twisted forms, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight, and they moved with a terrible purpose. Seraphine's chest tightened, her curse flared, sensing danger, yet the mark pulsed stronger, warm and reassuring. "Stay close," Draven said again, his hand brushing hers in a silent gesture of solidarity. "We fight as one." The creatures surged forward and the battle began. Draven moved with fluid precision, his every strike and maneuver honed by years of power and command. Seraphine followed, guided by instinct and the energy of the mark. Where her curse once brought pain and weakness, she now found strength, a sharpness of mind and reflex that allowed her to predict and counter the attacks of the twisted beings. Kale hissed from the shadows, attempting to manipulate the creatures, but Draven's presence disrupted his control. The Alpha King's power was both shield and sword, and Seraphine realized that her bond with him amplified her own abilities. Together they were more than predator and prey, they were a storm, unstoppable and intertwined. Through the clash of shadow and steel, Seraphine caught glimpses of something else in Draven. Vulnerability, yes, but also unspoken longing. His eyes, even amidst the fury of battle, sought hers, as though every strike was a promise that he would keep her safe, not out of duty alone, but because she mattered. When a creature lunged toward her, Seraphine instinctively struck with a force she did not know she possessed. The impact sent it sprawling into the mist. She gasped, heart racing, and Draven was at her side immediately, his hand steadying her. "Do you see?" he said, his voice low. "This is your strength. This is what I recognized." Her breath came in ragged bursts, but pride and wonder mixed with the adrenaline. I never knew," she admitted. "I thought my curse was only weakness." Draven's eyes softened. "The curse shaped you, yes, but it did not define you. You chose to endure, you chose to survive. That choice made you powerful." Their moment was brief, shattered by Kale's scream. The beta, desperate, attempted one final strike from the shadows. Seraphine and Draven acted in perfect synchrony. She predicted his movements, and he countered with overwhelming force. Together they confronted Kale, whose arrogance and cruelty crumbled under the combined might of their unity. "You are finished," Draven said, his voice echoing like thunder through the courtyard. "Your cruelty cannot touch her anymore." Kale's eyes flashed with defiance, but even he could see the truth in the Alpha King's words. He stumbled backward, realizing that his schemes, his mockery, and his shadows could not prevail against what had been forged in this night of trial: trust, recognition, and fierce, unyielding connection. With Kale's defeat, the creatures dissolved into mist, their forms vanishing as the last vestiges of the dark magic were extinguished. Seraphine sank to her knees briefly, exhausted but alive, and Draven knelt beside her. His hand brushed hers, the mark glowing faintly between them. It pulsed with warmth and affirmation, a silent promise of protection and partnership. "You fought well," Draven said, his tone gentle now, almost tender. "Do you feel it, the strength you carry?" Seraphine nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I feel more than I ever have," she admitted. "I feel alive." Draven's gaze softened and he lifted her chin, ensuring their eyes met. "You are more than alive," he said. "You are powerful, fierce, and deserving of respect and loyalty, not just from me, but from anyone who would ever dare to diminish you again." A silence fell over the courtyard, filled only by the rustle of the trees and the distant call of the night birds. For the first time, Seraphine allowed herself to feel hope, not the fragile, fleeting hope of survival, but a deeper, enduring hope that she could belong, that she could be more than her curse, more than the mocking eyes of those who sought to break her spirit. Draven extended his hand, and Seraphine took it without hesitation. Together, they stood amidst the quiet ruins of the courtyard, bonded not only by the mark but by shared strength, trust, and the realization that they had changed each other in ways neither had anticipated. Kale is gone for now, Draven said softly, though the hint of vigilance remained. But your journey is only beginning. Power, trust, and courage are yours to wield, and I will be here beside you for every step. Seraphine smiled faintly, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. I will not hide anymore, she said, voice steady. I will face what comes with strength and with you. Draven's lips curved into a rare, almost imperceptible smile. Good. That is all I ever wished for you to know. The castle, bathed in moonlight, seemed to breathe with them, its ancient stones whispering of history, power, and the new chapter unfolding. Outside, the northern forests remained mysterious and wild, but Seraphine no longer felt their menace in the same way. She had faced shadows, endured cruelty, and emerged stronger, not alone, but alongside someone who recognized her worth. As the first hints of dawn began to glow on the horizon, the mark pulsed once more, a quiet, steady heartbeat that mirrored their own. The curse that had haunted her now seemed a memory, a shadow that had shaped her into someone capable of claiming her own strength and destiny. And though Kale had been defeated, a sense of quiet vigilance lingered. Seraphine knew challenges would come again. Power, desire, and danger were intertwined in Valdren, but she no longer feared them. She had found an ally, a protector, and perhaps something deeper in Draven, the Alpha King who had claimed her in one fierce, irrevocable gesture. Together they turned toward the rising sun, their silhouettes framed by the golden light, ready to face a world where shadows still existed. But now, they would face them not as prey and predator, but as equals bound by courage, trust, and an unspoken promise of strength and loyalty that could withstand any darkness. The story of survival, recognition, and love in the shadowed lands of Valdren had reached a moment of peace, but the pulse of destiny, like the mark upon her hand, reminded Seraphine that her journey, though transformed, was far from over. And with Draven at her side, she was ready.